Welcome to Global Investment Voice, where we explore investment migration issues and opportunities from around the world. With a special focus on the U.S. EB-5 immigrant investor program, we'll also cover citizenship and residency by investment programs from around the globe. If you're an investor, fund manager, developer, or enterprising entrepreneur and want to get the most out of these global investment migration programs, you have come to the right place. I'm Mark Deal, and I'll be your co-host on this journey. I'm joined by your host attorneys Mona Shaw and Rebecca Singh, as well as other investment migration leaders from around the world. So let's get into Global Investment Voice. Mona, Rebecca, it's a week after the U.S. election. I know you two have lots of thoughts. I'm going to step out of your way. Let's hear it.
Well, Mark, 2024 really has been a year of elections, and we had new governments bringing out new policies that is certainly going to affect our residency and citizenship by investment investor.
Yeah, we've seen it here in the UK, for example. We saw the change of government back in July. We saw the closing of the non-dom regime, where we're also seeing many investors here opting out of choosing to reside in the UK.
Well, yeah, that's as a direct result of the non-dom regime going out. Well, now that we have the final results of the US elections and it's a definite return of Trump, we are heading into interesting times.
Oh, I will say so for sure. We're seeing so much controversy, right? We're seeing a lot of social media out there, blog posts. What's causing all of this?
You're right, Rebecca. The blog posts and the social media that we're seeing is so diametrically opposite. You have doom and gloom, encouraging immigration from the US outbound to Europe, and to the, oh my goodness, the world is wonderful again because we have Trump and it's all about pro-business. I think it's got to do a lot with Trump himself and what we saw in 2016, because back in 2016, that electoral campaign was dominated by such strong anti-immigration rhetoric. And even as EB-5 practitioners, we were bombarded at that time with questions from both prospective as well as investors who were already there. At that point, I do believe, though, that EB-5 stakeholders were quietly confident that whilst there was going to be a tougher stance on certain aspects of the immigration process, such as security screening and income auditing, overall, the EB-5 program would be left unchanged.
Well, Mona, here we are 8 years later. So we've seen all of this. We've seen the Trump administration come in. We've seen Biden administration coming in. So where do we see, what could we expect for the next 4 years?
Well, if I could just go back for a second, just go back a little bit back to 2016. And why did we even believe that investment by migration and EB-5 would be fine under the Trump program and under the Trump presidency? And that was really because of Trump's own attitude. Both he and Jared Kushner had both utilized EB-5, and they had shown a marked preference for it. But if you remember, everything got spoiled by the scandal. And then with Trump coming in, there really wasn't such a shock to the system that the strengths of the U.S. economy and the markets, there would still be a demand for investment within the U.S. And we did see that happening. But if you recall, back in 2017, there was that scandal that had erupted by the appearance and speech of Jared Kushner's sister, Nicole Mayer, at that EB-5 seminar in Beijing. And
Yes.
it was sparked by it was actually sparked by the Washington Post. And then the torrent of criticism came from the late Senator Dianne Feinstein, who's not a fan. But since then, there's a lot of changes in EB-5 with the new laws coming in, and just generally, it isn't in that same position that it was 8 years ago.
I agree in the fact that, at the end of his term as well, we saw EB-5 program was going through some instability, right? Where we were constantly extending was the program. I mean, we had shutdowns. We've seen all of that. And that's something I think we're going to discuss later, is that will we see that again? Because the program is still up for extension for 2027.
You're right. At the end of 2020, the EB-5 program wasn't even in legislation. If you remember, Rebecca, we were all worried about whether or not it would continue. We were getting those short extensions. And then it was only in 2022 that the RIA came in, the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act. But prior to Trump leaving office back in 2020, you may recall he did float a new program, which he basically referred to as smart immigration, which was immigration on a merits and points-based system. And really, that whole stance about taking a merit-based system really goes to what he really stands for, which is pro-business. At that time, there was also a suggestion that for EB-5 in particular, there would be a bifurcation of how USCIS would look at the projects, where the Department of Commerce would actually look at the projects and USCIS would look at the immigration. But it was floated, but nothing really ever happened.
And that was towards the EB-5 program. So I think his point-based system, we were seeing that what he was focusing on was more merit-based. And this time, and I think in the last election as well, he was really focused on the stopping of illegal immigration.
That's a very good point, actually.
Mhm.
And I think that is something we really need to point out from the outset, that yes, there was a lot of anti-immigration rhetoric. But like last time and this time, his stance really is that he wants to stop the illegal immigration. He really has, there's been nothing said negatively at all about business-based immigration or investment by immigration.
I think the outlook on that is there is enthusiasm from what we've seen for foreign investors coming in, and not even just for investing into the US and for creating new projects. And obviously, the whole program is based on jobs, which is another of Trump's points in bringing more jobs back to the US. So I think we're seeing more and more who are looking to come into the US versus we're seeing in the beginning, people are talking about coming to Portugal and looking at outbound immigration. So we're seeing both sides.
I agree. And whilst there are all of these theories, let's just look and analyze what we can expect to see in the next 4 years and whether or not it would advance in immigration by investment into the US or whether it would advance investment out of the US.
Okay, so one of the first things we saw, Mona, I know we're talking about it 4 years, but as soon as we saw is that as soon as Trump was elected, we saw an all-time high in the stock market.
Right. Right. What were they saying? The yields jumped and the dollar saw its best day since 2022.
Yeah.
But then, and apparently the last time that happened was when the GOP and Trump pushed that multi-trillion-dollar tax cut through.
Not only that came through, what was surprisingly on my end that I saw is that Bitcoin actually hit a record high as well the day after election.
That's really interesting because Trump really has put out a lot on Bitcoin during his campaign. And in fact, Trump has been the only candidate to show up at a Bitcoin conference.
Yeah, so he showed up there, which is interesting because it wasn't something he brought up in 2016. It was something that he wasn't going after. But all of a sudden, here we have Trump coming out, showing up to these conferences. We see him floating an idea about establishing a federal Bitcoin reserve. So he wanted to stress the importance of bringing more Bitcoin mining operations to the U.S.
That's so right, because the rest of the world and a lot of the places that we do get the investors that we work with coming into the US deal with Bitcoin. In fact, the US are quite behind on how Bitcoin is regulated. Well, it's not really regulated at all, really. And I think it's really important, not only for the economy and for investors coming in, but for EB-5 itself.
Oh, yes. And this is where we've talked so much about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, especially when it comes to source of funds and path of funds when sourcing your EB-5 petition. Of course, it was very difficult. USCIS didn't understand what is Bitcoin. They couldn't grasp the concept of what it is. You actually had to sell your Bitcoin and invest the cash from Bitcoin. But they were becoming more restrictive, and we've seen the rest of the world using it. I mean, Mona, like you said, our clients are making payments in Bitcoins.
Right. And they're getting frustrated.
Yeah, it just seems like, why is the U.S. so behind in not accepting this? But we have seen some changes earlier this year with the Biden administration.
Oh, you mean with the crypto queen, Cynthia Loomis? She's the senator for Wyoming, I believe.
Yeah, so we're seeing more interest coming in from politicians. So not only is Trump coming out to all these conferences, we're seeing Cynthia Loomis. She's the senator of Wyoming, kind of forefronting this idea of bringing cryptocurrency in. So back in January 2024, we finally saw that the SEC approved ETFs, which are exchange-traded funds. So that means there is a trading spot for Bitcoins, which is good news. It's a way forward. But I think we will probably see more policy changes or regulatory changes in this area.
Absolutely. But stay tuned because I think we're going to have a lot more on this topic coming up. It's so important to this area that we work in.
Oh, yeah. From just our foreign investors, EB-5, even in the RBCI industry. So there's a lot to talk about in this area.
Yeah, there's a number of businesses left the US because the SEC and other regulatory authorities were becoming overbearing and stifling innovation. And over the last 2 years, especially, we saw the SEC challenging not just companies with Bitcoins. I mean, there were so many lawsuits. And of course, they went after Elon Musk several times, who is thoroughly not a fan of the SEC. But there were a number of lawsuits, not only against crypto projects, Rebecca, but also EB-5 projects for allegedly violating securities laws.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of that happening throughout this administration. And I think we could see some changes happening. You know, Trump's out there saying that he's vowed to oust Gary Gensler, the current chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission. So
On the very first day, I think.
Let's see what's to come in January.
Well, let's hope we bring all of that other businesses back. But again, all of these things together, they do seem to encourage more trade, more investment in the US, which is what Trump is supposedly standing up for. So I do think we're going to see a different administration this time.
I see that, and he is encouraging it, but he's also on the other side talking about more tariffs. Will that deter other foreign businesses from trying to come into the U.S.? I think that will hurt. But Mona, what have we seen? I know you've been speaking to a lot of our CBI practitioners. What are they saying? What are they seeing out there?
Oh, that was interesting. Yesterday, I had a number of conversations because we also have an article coming out on this. And so I had a number of interviews with people overseas just to see what the reaction is. And I was focusing a lot on the Middle East. And it was very interesting. I can tell you, I have it written right here. We have a quote from Sam Byatt, who has ventured his opinion on this show many times. I have to read this out to you because this opinion was echoed throughout, actually. So he says, quote, "Well, Mona, we are all celebrating with Wall Street as we have finally someone in the office that values entrepreneurship. President Trump is attuned to businessmen and entrepreneurs. We will for sure see in his presidency the will to encourage legal immigration, particularly if those with millions in their pockets are ready to invest and create new jobs, rather than immigrants crossing the border with empty pockets." So I was like, whoa, that was interesting to see that. But the other reactions that I got was, another one was, logically, it's better to take on newcomers who have been well vetted and who we know their backgrounds. But the other reactions that I got was that the Trump administration is likely to have better relations than the Biden administration with Turkey and with Saudi, which could both affect trade and business. So, for example, with Saudi, Trump has a good relation with Mohammed bin Salman, and they want to revive a number of security pacts. So if you recall, last time Trump was in, he drew up the Abraham Accords, and that opened a number of diplomatic ties between Israel and the Arab states, but that also encouraged a number of businesses and investment into the United States. And with Turkey as well, Trump got on well with Erdogan. And there is a hope that if that is revived, that it would really help the situation with the consulate. Because we being in the United States, we use the Turkish consulate for a number of different countries and not just for Turkey.
Yeah, and we saw a lot of issues the last time, especially with Iranian clients. And I think that's the fear of with Trump coming in at this time. I know in this election, he had a really strong Arab base. And the fear, though, was that the issues with Iran and the backlog, the vetting, and a lot of denials that we've seen as well for those investors. or anyone coming in on any visa. So I think that was a concern on what we may see for this term.
Yes, it was stressed to me that that feeling might have dissipated. I know there is a lot of anti-Iranian stance generally, but for investors coming in, there was a hope that as a lot of the cases actually have got through that we've had pending, that there will be a continuation of that. Because quite frankly, we did not see too much of a change in USCIS under Biden. We saw very similar stances both at the consulate and at
Mhm.
USCIS. There were some pointers, there were some differences. If you recall, there was, Rebecca, prior to RIA, there was this deference issue, meaning that if your case had been approved for one person, USCIS was supposed to use that approval as deference and approve everyone else. But then when Trump came in, he suddenly said, no, I don't like this. And he threw the deference stance completely out under the exemplar petition, which is filed under the F form.
Yeah, so that is designated to approve projects under a regional center. I think that a good part that came out of that is USCIS has one form for one project set that they have to review. And once that's approved, then they continue to review the investor petitions, the I-526Es, which now presumes that they will also get approved once their source of funds are approved because that initial project application has been approved.
That really came in with the new legislation as opposed to
Mhm.
something under the Trump policy or the Biden policies.
Yes, but the Chevron has been taken away deference, right? The Supreme Court ended this Chevron deference, and that was a defeat to the Biden administration. We talk about it on an EB-5 front, but in an overall, it's taking away of what the agencies would have done if there wasn't a clear interpretation of a statute. So now it seems that all of this is going to the judicial system where it's now, is there a checks and balances? Because now they're going, the lower courts and the Supreme Court can eventually start reviewing all of these and making that decision versus when before it did give that latitude to the agencies themselves to
USCIS.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
or to any other agency to interpret the statutes in the way they would administer it.
Right. So basically, what all that means, I'm sure people, our listeners, are thinking, what are we talking about? It means that the policies of a president probably, if that policy of the president sways the agencies like USCIS, it would not have as much effect as it may have done before. But what the Trump administration will continue with, Rebecca, and I'm hoping it doesn't cause delays, because I do know that Trump has campaigned that he would be pushing this forward. But again, it was also there under the Biden administration, is the continuation of the FDNS, which is the Fraud Detection and National Security Directorate within the USCIS.
So it would make it harder. Again, we go back to the consulate and making it, I guess, scrutinize everyone coming in through any visas.
Yeah, because there are going to be enhanced reviews and there are a lot more verifications which will be required for the US Department of State, which is something at the consulate. But Rebecca, it's not that much more different than the enhanced due diligence that's required for the CBI programs.
True. But it should have been in place in the first, I mean, it makes it seem like we're the consulates doing their job in the first place. And I think they were, right? I just think, though, now it seems to have more of effect of how the timeline, how long will it take for everyone to get through? At least with the CBI programs, yes, they do their fraud detection, but they're getting passports within 3 to 4 months. Whereas here, it's taken 3 to 4 months just to get an interview at the consulate. So there are some differences and there needs to be change because at the end of the day, it's kind of deterring people from wanting to apply for a visa. It's like you're spending so much time waiting for the approval. And then for you to go through the interview process and vetting and all of that, are you waiting another year plus to do that? People are really thinking about it.
Oh, yeah, but surely the whole fraud detection and security system is supposed to prevent the long delays which we had under the Trump administration the first time, which they termed as administrative processing, because everybody used to be put in administrative processing, even if they had just some simple issues. It was very rare for someone to get their visa out directly. So that is the idea. And if that enhances the speed, of which the consulates can work, then that is going to help trade as well. But overall, the EB-5 visa program wasn't really affected that much under Trump. I know people do like to think that just immigration generally is affected, but I think the stability will continue.
We see a lot of concern with Trump coming in. I already have investors calling and saying they want to speak, they have concerns, especially if they're green card holders. And last time I remember even green card holders having issues or concerns about, will I be stopped at the border? So I don't think that's going to be a concern. I don't think we're going to see a stop in EB-5. I think we're going to see a lot more interest because of the tax.
Oh, good point. Good point.
Yeah, so lowering taxes.
Yeah, because that has traditionally been the real reason that so many people want to go America outbound. And if Trump is able to lower the taxes as he has promised, I mean, last time he made a huge difference. And the theory is this time that corporate taxes will again be favorable and be lowered. So yeah, that is certainly going to encourage investment and doing business with the US.
Yes. So we've talked about outbound. So US citizens going out and seeking second citizenships. If this comes in, we won't see that much. And then it will also attract foreign investors to come in and create businesses here as well.
Now, I'm not being biased at all, promise, against either Biden or Trump. But there was a number of things which happened over the last few years, which you could have perhaps thought that Trump would have done it rather than Biden. And one, Rebecca, was the advent of the Amigos Act, which really stopped anyone who was buying citizenship in the Caribbean countries from getting an E2.
It didn't stop it per se. What they did is they put in a restriction in that now you had to have residency for 3 years. Instead of, in the past, our investors were getting the Caribbean passport within 3 to 4 months and then immediately applying for the E2 visa. Whereas now you have to actually wait and reside in the country for 3 years before applying for the E2 visa.
Yeah, and I think that what people are fearing the most, and certainly it's reflecting in a lot of the emails and the blog posts, is the fact that Trump plans to tighten the immigration rules for H-1B visas. But it might be a good thing, because if it's tightened so that it's more merit-based, isn't that going to be what we want? More about the smart immigration coming in?
So that's one aspect of it, Mona. But on the other side of it, you had that whole issue of buy American, hire American, whereas the administration wanted to see Americans being hired and jobs being created for the American people. So we've seen the issues with that. And then we've also seen where, as well with the H-1B, the spouses get an H-4 visa where you do get an EAD card. And then there was talk on ending that program for them as well. So there's the good and the bad of making the H-1B more restrictive.
Just like the EB-6 of building the wall. So.
Yeah. So it's just I think a lot of things are out there floating around. And again, it's what's actually going to come into play? What's really going to happen? Are all of these things we saw that last term with Trump you say all these things, but you cannot implement all of it. There is a system. You, as a president, yes, you're the president, but you don't have the right to make changes and do everything just you alone, right? There's a checks and balances.
He did change the status of Hong Kong last time, but he did that through means of an executive order.
Executive order.
Yeah, because Hong Kong lost its differential treatment and it was no longer autonomous, but being included with China. So he put all of the investors who had come in from Hong Kong as being part of mainland China. So it put them in a backlog category.
Yes. So, but those are coming through executive orders. Even the Muslim ban that happened, that was through an executive order. Of course, that was repealed right away when Biden came in, but they're still there. And what else is Trump going to do when he comes in?
Oh, he wants to end birthright citizenship, but again, by executive order. Perhaps we should talk about that for a minute, because that has been really brought out a lot. Because he vowed that from day one, he's going to sign an executive order to stop any federal agencies from giving automatic U.S. citizenship to children of illegal aliens or anybody who comes in and gives birth to their child in the United States.
Yes, we've actually seen pregnant women who are coming in on a B1, B2 during his term, where they were actually stopped from entering because of that fear of them coming in and giving birth in the US without living here, paying taxes, and doing any of that. And pretty much just taking advantage of the US healthcare.
Well, under the Biden administration, though, the people who were coming in and giving birth, they were approached, their visas were canceled if they did that using US resources and healthcare, because that's what a lot of people were doing. They were coming in and just using Medicaid and free healthcare. But the birthright citizenship, to remove that is going to be very difficult because it's part of the Constitution, if you recall. It was basically put there for those born into Native American tribes to make sure that they all became U.S. citizens.
Yeah, it's part of the 14th Amendment, and it grants citizenships to those who are born in the U.S. But at this, and of course, Trump is coming in wanting to kind of, just take it away with an executive order, which is, but again, like you said, that's why I keep saying there are checks and balances here. There's a legislative, there's executive, there's the judicial branches. So you can't just come and just take something away right away. There's a lot of hearsay. There's a lot of talk out there. And I think for our listeners, Mona, is a lot of people are concerned, what is going on with the U.S.? Is it time to move away? What's going to happen? And I would have faith in our system that we would have checks and balances, and that someone coming in wouldn't be able to just, and with any presidential candidate coming in and just stripping away constitutional rights. And although we have seen a lot of changes, but hopefully we're not going to see such drastic changes.
There's a lot of food for thought in this podcast, and we are obviously speculating. Some of the issues are things that happened in 2016. Some of the issues we've brought up are things that President Trump-elect, I'm not sure, do we call him former President Trump-elect? Has brought up in his campaigns. But I do believe that the whole phenomena of America outbound really is not connected with this. I know that there are a lot of campaigns and the blogs are going out there, but the America outbound phenomena, something that came about well before all of this happened, perhaps COVID or the extension of technology and the ability to work overseas. So I don't see America outbound getting better or doing more. I don't know what you think, Rebecca, but I don't see this. I don't think it's going to happen in the way that a lot of our colleagues do think it will do.
I agree with you. I think right now it is something to say, okay, Trump's in, here's a way to get out. I don't think that's what happened the last time. I agree with you in that we saw outbound more so after COVID. And before that, we saw it because it was more on taxation. So it wasn't even to do with who's coming in, who's going out of office. It was taxation that made a lot of people go outbound. And then here, like you said, COVID, working from home, people are able now to travel and do things from abroad. So we're seeing a lot of more who want multiple passports, not even just having one. So having that ability to travel and to go to different places. I'm excited to see where things are going to go with EB-5 and with RCBI, because we have a lot of interest. A lot of people want to travel, get the passport, want to do business here in the U.S. And at the same time, waiting for their EB-5, it is a longer process. But I think we'll see more multiple passport holders, I think, moving forward.
And we haven't seen any slowdown in projects either. In fact, we've seen more projects and a different type of developers, family groups coming in and putting projects together, and not necessarily your one big developer as in the past. So
exactly,
lots of happening. Interesting times.
Yes.
We have been a little all over the place. There's a lot to digest. But the issue really is that we have been around for some time. We've seen different regimes. We saw from Obama to Trump to Biden, back to Trump again. And every time the administration changes, something changes within the policies. And we have to deal with the fallout. Now, obviously, we are playing a lot on our previous experiences. Saying that, I don't believe that these 4 years will reflect what happened between 2016 and 2020, because I don't believe we have the same candidate there. And moreover, the world has changed. A lot has changed. We also, within the EB-5 program, we have legislation. That has made a difference. The legislation means specifically that certain things which were there before and relied on USCIS and whoever controlled USCIS to make a decision is not there anymore. The Supreme Court did vote on Chevron, so there is no deference policy anymore. What will happen in the next 4 years? We are hoping that we are going to see more of a compatibility with doing business with the world. And that's one of the reasons why when I spoke with our colleagues in the UAE and around, that's what they were mentioning. Oh, he's friends with Erdogan. He's friends with MBS. He's going to make things okay. So let's hope that this enthusiasm and this optimism is well played and continues.
Thank you for being with us today on Global Investment Voice. Do you want to get the most out of global migration and citizenship opportunities? Then head on over to our website at globalinvestmentvoice.com. From there, you can easily search and stream from hundreds of podcast episodes, as well as stay current with the latest migration news and investment opportunities by joining our insider newsletter. The topics presented in this podcast are informational in nature only and are not to be taken as specific legal, financial, or investment advice. Mona, Rebecca, and their legal staff can be reached at mshawlaw.com or by calling their New York office at 212-233-7473.